Welcome in. You didn't find this by accident. This is the Whisper Lounge, a soft space for the conversations we weren't supposed to have. While you're here, you can leave a tip using the captivate.fm link in the show bio. And if you're ready, your complimentary 7-day exploration journal is waiting. Just head to whisperlounge.club/join to claim it and be one of the first to step inside to explore. Hey everyone. Well, I'm really excited to talk about the topic today because it is just one of the things that comes to mind and makes me laugh. And I also think that it stirs up some pretty good conversation when you start peeling back the layers, peeling back the meanings behind it. So today I want to discuss the phrase, I got mine. Does it mean power, pleasure? What are the politics of satisfaction? So, I got mine. I got mine. It's a funny little phrase, right? Kind of smug, kind of sexy, a little selfish, or is it? The more I sit with it, the more I realize this one phrase says so much about how we've been taught to think about pleasure, especially sexual pleasure, and who gets to have it, prioritize it, who gets to talk about it. So, where does this phrase live? Where do we hear it most often? I mean, we hear it in sex, obviously, but we also hear it in power, money, success. Sometimes it's a joke, like, well, I got off. Sometimes it's defensive, like, I had to take care of myself. And it kind of lives at this intersection of pleasure and permission. What does it mean to get yours? And is it okay if someone doesn't get theirs? So I have this personal story that kind of relates to this. I've never actually said the phrase, at least not that I can think of, I got mine, but I said something very similar to it, and I definitely had that thought. And so how do I summarize this experience? I was kind of seeing someone, it was casual, but at the same time, we were seeing each other often, and he moved, and so he was long distance. And I was going to an event, and he indicated, I think I might come to this event too. It was in a different city. And I was like, oh, that would be great, because then I get to have, a little bit of fun at this event. I don't have to find someone new, have a one-night stand. I can hang out with this guy who I already know and who I've already been having a sexual relationship with. That sounds fun and easy. And so he ended up coming to the event, and I thought he was coming to see me. I mean, hindsight, after being in and out of this casual relationship for a while with him, this relationship ended years ago, but hindsight, I realize now he was definitely not coming for me, but he wasn't being fully really forthright with me either and upfront about what he was doing or what he would do in these situations in general. He was a player. He was going around, he was with all kinds of women, and I just didn't realize it at the time. And so he shows up at the event, and I'm expecting him to be there for me. And it was just kind of an awkward night. And finally, he was going back to his room, and I just assumed. And I inserted myself and went to the room with him. And he begged off and essentially said, that he had a headache, which is the women's excuse usually. And so we went to sleep. It was very late. It was, early morning hours when we got back to the room. And the next day he was leaving. And I honestly don't even remember what led up to this. But finally I realized in my head, I thought, no, he told me he was coming here for me. I want to have sex. I want, to have a release and have a little bit of fun, and he's not going to leave without giving me that, and he'll enjoy himself. There's no losers here. And so I kind of had him pinned down on the bed, and I said something like, you're not leaving without me taking advantage of you, or something like that. And I was on top of him, and he looked at me, and I said, I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna take what's mine, or something like that. And he just kind of looked at me confused. And then I stopped myself and I said, well, actually, wait, though. I do have to have your consent. I realized I'm not going to just take truly, And I said, so do I have your consent? Is this okay? And he kind of went, okay, yeah. And, um, and anyways, we had sex, and I don't even remember the sex. And he left uh, the city. He went back to where he had moved to, and I just remember that being such a formative moment for me because I had come from this very conservative Christian background and was just kind of figuring out sex and being single and all of that after my divorce. And that was my I got mine experience. So in that case, I'll expound a little bit more on how I interpret what I went through, in that experience. But it does make me laugh every time. He was very much a kind of guy who took his, if that makes sense. He was, he was kind of very macho, very alpha, and would take his anytime he wanted. And so I think that's why it was more impactful for me. Like, it was funny to me that I was doing it back to him. But anyways, let's talk a little bit more about this in generalities. There's some social programming that happens with all of us around pleasure. And we are mostly taught to prioritize others' needs. But I'm curious about that between the genders, male and female. I know if you're raised female, you're taught to prioritize others' needs. You're taught to kind of be socialized. You're socialized to be more nurturing. That may not be the case for the men in the room, but for women, I know that's the case for most of us. And so pleasure for a lot of us is something that we give. It's not something that we claim. And there's a weird guilt that comes up when there's something you want just for yourself. And how this can tie into sex, it's true. Can you want sex just for yourself? But it also ties into things like ambition, emotional needs, time alone. I feel guilty when I take time alone. I'm sure that resonates with other people out there. I'm positive it does. So the question I'm kind of asking is, who taught us what it means to take up space, specifically with our pleasure? Where did this idea come from that prioritizing your pleasure makes you selfish? And let's try it from a gender perspective. When a man says something like, I got mine, or in different words, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, those kinds of things, it's kind of expected. When a woman says it, oftentimes it's read as bitchy or cold or greedy. And there's something about pleasure or whose pleasure that we've been taught to value. So if pleasure kind of innately implies that there's some type of reciprocity involved, which is interesting in itself, that I think it does. I think the idea of sexual pleasure does carry this idea of reciprocity, like there should be a give and a take. And that's interesting, right? Where does that assumption come from? But what does it mean to give and receive pleasure in a way that feels mutual and not transactional? How do we talk about reciprocity without turning sex into a scorecard? Is there a place where pleasure is more shared and fluid and responsive? I've had a hard time in my current relationship truly believing, I guess understanding, but really believing that my partner, he says that he wants to give me pleasure. He says, if you want an orgasm, just let me know. I'll give you one. And then he says, I actually enjoy doing that. And that was really mind-boggling to me. Like, I believed him because he's not going to lie, but I also didn't believe him in my core. I still feel like I'm taking something and not giving back. And that's fascinating to me because the other side of it is arousal, right? What happens in our past or in our psychology that arouses us, like givers and takers. So I don't know if you've ever heard that term in relation to sexual arousal, but there are givers, people who are aroused by giving pleasure, and there are takers, people who are aroused by taking pleasure, I guess. I don't know if I'm using words that are contradictory. And so I don't know where all that comes from. Like, where does that develop from? I'm hoping to learn more about that and about these type topics and talk about them with you guys all here. But once something arouses you, it's kind of embedded in your psychology. And I think we can change that a little bit. Obviously, I believe that that's fluid. And as we stated in the last episode, or in one of the previous episodes, it exists on a spectrum. But, there is something to that. And so I am a taker. I get aroused by being given to, and yet I feel guilty taking. It's just very, very interesting. And I do think that there's an important lesson in this phrase, I got mine. And it has to do with selfishness, really. The idea of selfishness that I've started to really relate to and consider, I guess, draw meaning from is this idea that selfishness is something that can really be a good thing. And honestly, if we all did more of it, we'd all be happier. It's this liberation of owning your satisfaction without apology, because you're the only one who knows what satisfies you. So why would any of us expect to be able to satisfy each other? I'm the only one who knows what satisfies me. So I should be in charge of making sure that I get satisfaction, and I shouldn't apologize for that. And I shouldn't expect someone else to apologize to me if they're in charge of making sure that they're satisfied. So saying it after a hookup or encounter where you actually felt satisfied, not just tolerated, that's kind of like an empowering situation. Honestly, in the experience I shared earlier, I felt empowered. Like, I'm empowered to say to you that I want some sex and that's what I want, and I'm going to take it with your consent. It's also it's a little rebellious, right? It's about not doing something that you would normally do or playing by the rules. You're flipping the script a little bit. The potential of the phrase, I got mine, as a reclamation, it's a reclamation of agency, of honesty, of sexual sovereignty. I needed a lot of that after my divorce initially, to feel like I was allowed to have sex when I wanted to have sex, and that I enjoyed it, and that there was a need for it, and that was okay. And there are some times when the phrase I got mine isn't as great. It can be sad, can be that there's a disconnection and you're focusing only on yourself and there was nothing mutual about the experience. But I think there's something to be said for exploring what it feels like when we stop expecting mutual pleasure and we take what we need to take and what we can take in the moment. But also as a partner, allowing our partner to do that, or the partner that we're with, allowing the partner to take what they want to take and what they need to take in that moment, and there being no resentment. Like, I'm proud of you. Yeah. Get yours. That's awesome. Yes. Can I help? Great. I don't know. It begs the question, what does mutual pleasure look like? Does it mean that I'm responsible for the other person's satisfaction and I'm giving and I'm giving and I'm giving? Or does mutual pleasure look like we're each responsible for our own in a quote unquote selfish kind of way? I think if that starts happening, we shift from this idea of I got mine to we got ours, regardless of who orgasmed and who didn't. What happens when we slow down and ask more and listen better, not just to our partners, but to ourselves? We don't need to turn it into a scorecard. We can just make more space for curiosity and this idea of reciprocity. Pleasure, this idea of abundance versus scarcity. If I'm taking, I got mine and I took something, and you come from a scarcity mentality where there is a limited amount of pleasure to be taken, and I've taken some, well, now there's less to have. But if you come from an abundance mindset, that things are always expanding and growing, and once you pull water out of that well of abundance, abundance still remains. Well, if that's the case, and pleasure isn't finite, it expands when you're both paying attention. And that's really cool, because we can all say, I got mine, and it not diminish or take away from anyone else that's having the same experience. We can have the I got mine experience all at the same time together. So, I don't know, I feel like this phrase First of all, I laugh every time I think about that experience I had, my I got mine experience. But I really think that I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's just honest. Sometimes it's playful, sometimes it's protective, sometimes maybe it's a little bit sad, but it is always revealing. And I'm inviting, I guess, everyone to do what I try to do, and that is to be aware of when you are saying, I got mine. Don't worry about everyone else so much and what they're dealing with or what they mean by it. But care about yourself. Are you in a situation where that's how you feel? Well, why do you feel that way? Why do you think that way? What made the situation that way? What kind of partner were you with? What experience was it? Does it bring you feelings of growth and expansion, or does it bring you feelings of concern and worry and fear? Either way, let's just be curious about it. The real question might not be whether I got mine, but whether I even know what mine is. So I got mine. I got mine. It's a phrase I'm reclaiming, I guess, not as a sign that I don't care about others, but as a reminder that my pleasure matters, and that's okay, and that I'm allowed to want, which is such a cliche female thing to say nowadays. But I think it's cliche because a lot of us struggle with it. I'm allowed to receive, and that maybe this is the big piece that I feel like would be so amazing if we all started shifting in this direction. Maybe if we all got ours, whatever ours is, we'd be a little less starved for connection. So hopefully that provoked some thought for you all. And hopefully each of you feels a little more comfortable going out this week and saying, I got mine. To close, every once in a while I like to close with a reading or something that's not from my head. And today I want to read from the book Want. Gillian Anderson did a collection of fantasies. So the book's called Want, and if you want to get it, every single page essentially is a fantasy that someone submitted anonymously. And I think this is a great place to talk about or to read a fantasy, because it's about something that's truly yours and what you want unashamedly and unapologetically. So I'm going to read one of the fantasies from the book. So just to reiterate, this isn't my fantasy, but it's a fantasy that's in the book Want, and I just thought it was a interesting one to read. A little bit generic. Some of these get pretty heated, but thought it might be a good way to close out this episode. Mostly, I fantasize about passionate, all-consuming sex. Not the gentle, slow, thrusting sex where your partner may reach down and caress your face. I want the animalistic, domineering, don't think, just do kind of sex, where it is just that and nothing else. The kind where you are being held so tight that you get red marks that may bruise, bites that hurt, but they hurt the right way as you're in the moment. Being crushed under someone's weight, too. There is a form of helplessness that I struggle to explain, knowing just how strong that individual really is, how strong they could be, knowing that they may do anything they wish, and yet they choose not to. Having their breath against your skin that raises all your hairs and words spoken that may feel like a violation if said outside the situation. They're said in a certain tone, hushed and concealed in the moment. The kind that makes you near breathless from a mix of both shock and arousal. I want to be so engulfed in the sensation that I don't have to think about how much I can hear myself or the creaking of the bed. I just want to feel everything. I want to get up the next day and be sore in a pleasant way, a reminder of what went on. That kind of sex. That is what I desire most. Raw, all-consuming, passionate sex. The memorable kind. So thank you all for being here, listening. Thank you for letting me talk a little bit. I feel like today, I got mine. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for being here. Tip the lounge or grab your free journal while it lasts at whisperlounge.club.